Okay,
Okay.
we've got to look
We
at,
do have to.
if we're moving on now, we've got to look at the economy of Nigeria, but let's look at it from the perspective of what has been the complaints of some of the governors across the country, that there is dwindling amount of money being part of the federal allocation to states. What is being the situation in your state, and how is Edo State coping with that dwindling federal allocation? Are you living very well on your internally generated revenue, or is it a case of having to go to the bond market?
Well, it's a very unfortunate situation. The truth of the matter is, you make budget, and oftentimes on budget day, Nigerians are glued to television, both at the state and the federal level, to see what is in the budget. And at the end of the day, the projected revenue is not realized. And once the projected receipts were not realized, you are not going to be able to deliver on your commitment, because one is a precondition for the other. And what it means is that across the country, governments, governors, presidents, we are not delivering on our budgets because the revenue are not realized. Now, at the federal level, they can borrow as much as they wish. Between the government and the CBN, there is a cozy relationship. They can have bonds, they don't need my approval. But when I want to get bond, then I need to go to the federal government, who is borrowing so much to give consent for me to borrow, which in the first place I think is very unfair. But that is the procedure you've got to go through. You need endorsement of the Ministry of Finance, and you need endorsement of DMO and several other people. But they do their own without my own endorsement.
But I guess they
However,
do
the
it
real
with the
issue that you're
endorsement
raising
of,
is
yes.
whether or not there is a shortfall in revenue. There's a huge, huge drop in revenue. Throughout 2013, Edo State government, on average, receive about 80, sometimes 75%, sometimes 70% of the budgeted revenue. And what makes this a bit difficult for one to understand is the fact that watching news, somehow over the past 2 years, 3 years, the price for oil has averaged $108 a barrel on average. Sometimes 109, 110, sometimes 106, so on average about 108. And this is, again, I've watched some of your discussions about events in America, in China, all those forecasts that suggest oil price was going to drop. Americans have discovered alternative sources.
True.
I have always argued that when economists talk like that, they take a static view, as if the indicators we see will remain permanent. But the challenge of every government around the world is to do something differently to revise that trend. And I've always argued that when our people do forecasting on the basis of, everything is going to come down, they think that, Europe and America are run, or Asia run their country the way we run ours. They take measures to stimulate the economy, to return back to growth, to stimulate consumption, etc. In any event, it's now clear that oil has averaged these numbers. And the highest benchmark that we've had during the same period was exactly $79 for last year, 2013. So if you have $79 a barrel, and on average you sold at 108 a barrel, obviously you have about 30%,
which is excess
which you
crude.
save in your excess crude. And I do know that the last time, we had the numbers when we had Economic Council meeting towards the end of 2012, we had about $10.5 billion in the excess crude account. The idea was that we needed to grow it up to that number before we can share. Some of us have argued that there is not much merit in spending money that has not been budgeted, because clearly the letter and the spirit of the Constitution is clear. Don't spend what has not been appropriated. And therefore, by maintaining excess crude account and dishing out to it and spending it, in my view, not being a lawyer, it seems to me that to the extent that the money was not captured in appropriation, we are not supposed to spend it. Parliament must appropriate before the executive spend, at the federal, at the state and at the local government level. However, this doesn't seem to be the case. But what I found worrisome is that throughout 2013, to my recollection, about $2 billion twice was shared, $1 billion, another towards the end of the year, another $1 billion. Altogether about $2 billion. And yet, the SS crude account, I'm told, has depleted from 10.5 billion to 2 billion.
So how was it spent?
So I'm like, money it doesn't evaporate. It doesn't melt. It doesn't just disappear. And it doesn't fly. It doesn't have wings. So somebody has to explain something. But the last explanation I think I heard was that, now, in 2013, another thing that is important is that since 2009, when I was sworn in as a governor, November 12, 2008, throughout 2009, 2010, the budgeted amount when if for any reason, the production in a particular month falls short of the budget, they take funds from the SS crude account to fund the budget in full under what they call augmentation. In other words, they augment the shortfall by taking funds from the SS crude account, which makes some sense. That if there is an unforeseen shock, then you take from your savings to balance it so that the budget can run in full. That was the case in 2009, 2010, I believe up to 2011. But by 2012 or so, I think they still practice that. But by 2013, they came out with a policy that there is no more augmentation. Again,
are you talking about the federal government?
I'm talking about federal government, okay. Ministry of Finance.
Okay.
That the government will no longer augment. So we will distribute only that accrue in a particular month. Mm-hmm. But again, this is only half of the truth, because what they were saying is, if the budget was for 2.5 million barrels per day, and because of the problem of oil theft, 400,000 barrels was stolen or lost due to shutdown or for whatever reason, they will put on the table 200 barrels per day at $79. The difference between $79 and the actual sale will still move to SS crude account. They will not augment the loss in volume, which was why 2013 was a particularly difficult year. I don't agree with this argument, but that was the policy. So as far as I know, there was no augmentation, which means that all the difference between what was produced and what was stolen was taken out. Whatever was left was what was shared in terms of volume. In terms of price, the savings arising from the budgeted rate and the actual amount sold was supposed to be in the SS crude account. So theoretically, if we had about 8 billion, if I make allowance for the $2 billion that was shared for 2012, in 2013, the least I will expect, because the numbers were averaging the same, 108, we will still have saved over $10 billion. And therefore, ideally, we should be having, by my own estimation, we should have between 16, 18 to $20 billion in the SS crude account.
So what does
and
that
yet,
mean?
last meeting, I'm told the account is now around $3 billion.
So were there questions asked, Your Excellency?
Long question, but very, very short and deficient.
What is the answer from the federal government on this?
The last time I understand, there was an attempt to link the depletion of the SS crude with the question of Shopee. Shopee is a federal government program which is funded from the savings arising from the reduction in the petroleum subsidy. you remember that the president did promise that savings arising from the reduction will be judiciously used in areas that the public will feel the impact. And consequently, Shopee scheme was set up at the federal level. But Shopee was to be funded, not from SS Crude account, supposed to be funded from the savings, the additional money that you pay when you go to buy.
Subsidy.
Yeah, the subsidy reduction. So, and as far as I know, you cannot explain SS Crude by reference to Shopee fund.
So, Your Excellency, I'm really sorry to interject now because we have very limited time, but in terms of this particular issue, what are governors going to do to ensure that there is a clear understanding of what has happened to that amount of volume of money, and going forward, what is expected to happen? Because if 10, 15 billion is said to not be there and there is no explanation that is acceptable to Your Excellency and other governors, then what are you planning to do? How do you want to deal with this issue?
If you ask me, I think it's actually about Nigerians, because I'm only a steward. I mean, the money is belonging to Nigerians and belongs to, in my own case, Edo State people. I am just a cook. These ingredients are not mine. But however, I have a responsibility to protect the interests of Edo State people. You know, for 6 months, we have not had a formal meeting of the National Economic Council, where the federal government is supposed to explain to us, you know, what is going on. How much did we sell? How much was stolen? I happen to also be a member when we interrogated this about 8 months ago. We interrogated this. We asked all of these questions. And as a result, a committee was set up under Governor Dwaga, and I was a member, to look at the whole issue of oil theft. And I know we had a very interesting meeting in which even members of the armed forces, the GTF and others were involved to try to understand what is the problem. Because the territorial water is the same. The people are the same. What has happened that even after we have the amnesty and everything ought to have settled, how come that we are still dealing with this volume of theft? And when you look at the number, I mean, 400,000 barrels, 500,000 barrels a day, it cannot be explained by reference to the drums of that we see in illegal mining sites, you know, that you find in part of the Niger Delta region. And that this is something that is scattered away in big tanks. And I am unable to accept that, you know, a tanker being in Nigerian waters for a couple of days, and people are using small vessels to take stolen crude and feed it to the big vessel, and it's scattered away. The Air Force can't see it, even with old-fashioned helicopters. The Navy, however poor it is, cannot put a knockout to say, wait a minute, we are here. And they just go away like that. And this is happening on a daily basis. I mean, it's difficult for very ordinary people like me to see through that.
Your Excellency, is definitely not ordinary.
And you know, but I do remember that day that even officials of the Ministry of Finance, specifically